Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and it's time once again for your weekly wrap-up. And this week I thought we would talk all about Apple Silicon because one of my predictions of the year was that Apple would release ARM Macs, and it looks like they're going to be doing that before the year is out. Will I get an upgrade to my favorite little MacBook here? Who knows, but we're going to talk about what this means for the personal computer industry right now. Now, Apple's been designing its own hardware for quite some time, and that includes the chips that are found inside of the iPhone and iPad, along with the Apple TV and the Apple Watch and many other products. And it gives Apple a tremendous ability to control the entire stack because the people designing their operating system are working within the same company as the people who are designing the processors that will be running that operating system. And it gives them a tremendous ability to find efficiencies, increase profit margins. Basically, the entire stack here on this iPhone is designed in one place, and they don't have to rely on other companies to give them the components they need to drive their hardware. That's been a big story of Apple's success here, especially on the mobile side. But on the Mac, they've still been relying on other companies to drive their products. Intel makes the processors in Macs. They also need AMD to design GPUs for those Macs. And I think Apple has been looking at what they've been able to do on the iOS side and wishing they could do it on the Mac side. And it looks like now their chips have gotten powerful enough that they can start moving in that direction. Now, this is not the first time that Apple has shifted the processor driving their computers. In fact, they've done it 3 times in the past. They went from Motorola 68,000 chips that began in 1984 with the first Mac. They shifted over to PowerPC back in 94. And what was really cool about that transition was that if you bought their Power Macintosh, you could still run all of the older Mac software during the transition. They had a translation layer that, although would not be as fast as a native 68K Mac, it was certainly fast enough. And I remember being very surprised by how well those PowerPC Macs ran the old software. And then in late 2005 and into 2006, Apple transitioned from PowerPC over to Intel. And it was a pretty remarkable transition because these Macs that came out around that time, just like the ones you can buy now, ran Windows just as well as they ran Mac OS. And at that point in time, I had a PowerBook G4 that I was doing presentations with using Keynote. And then I was doing a lot of my other work stuff on Windows, and I was able to do both on that one machine. And not only did it run all of the great new Apple Intel stuff, it also ran all of the PowerPC software that I was running on that PowerBook, including Photoshop, because I didn't want to buy a new version of Photoshop. I was happy with the one that I had back when you could buy it. And I was just running PowerPC Photoshop on that Intel MacBook for quite some time, and it was working just fine for the things that I did. And again, just a real testament to how good Apple is at this transitional technology. Now, the reason why Apple makes these transitions in processing platforms is because they want to remain competitive. That was certainly the driver back in the early part of the 2000s when they moved from PowerPC to Intel. This was done because Steve Jobs famously was frustrated with the rate of development on the PowerPC chips versus the Intel equivalents. Intel was getting better at power efficiency and performance per watt. PowerPC wasn't quite there, and Apple decided they'd be better off with Intel as a partner driving their Macs versus the PowerPC chips, and that's where they ended up. And I think what's happening now is a very similar situation in that Apple sees there's potential to move the Mac platform forward, and they can't do it right now based on where Intel is at in their chip development. And of course, Apple has been developing their own chips now for the better part of a decade. And if you take a look at the A12X Bionic chip that is in the 2018 iPad Pro, my iPad here, it's tremendously powerful, and on certain tasks, it will benchmark and operate in many cases faster than the Intel i7 that was available at the time that this chip was released from Apple. And that doesn't mean it's going to be great at everything, but the things that a lot of consumers are doing with an iPad, it's going to do better. And I would say on the Mac side, the things that people do with Macs, it's going to do better with an ARM-based Apple chip versus the Intel equivalent and get better battery life. And I think that's a big part of what is driving Apple's decision. But there will be things that may not run so well, but there will be many things that run very well. So let's take a look at some things they had in their demo from the keynote. This is Final Cut Pro, the full-on version running in Mac OS on the new Apple Silicon. And as you can see here, they're editing a 4K video. They're dropping in color grading and color effects here with a little lens flare going on along with text. They said they were able to actually get 3 simultaneous 4K streams going on this edit in real time without any rendering going on either. And that's pretty remarkable for something that is essentially an iPad processor. I don't know if they said exactly which chip they were running in this demo, but I think it's the one that will be included with the developer kit, which isn't all that much different than what's currently in the iPad Pro. And one of the things that I've been frustrated with the iPad Pro is the fact that I don't think anyone's really ever taken advantage of the processing power inside of this device. There are some, edge examples here and there, but largely most of the apps that I have on my iPad Pro that are supposedly the real hardware pushing things also run pretty well on my daughter's $250 iPad as well. And that speaks to just how good Apple is at silicon design for these very specific use cases. But there will be things perhaps in this transition that may not work as well. Another thing Apple showed in the demo was an Intel game running on Mac. This is Tomb Raider. And they said this was done without any porting whatsoever, and it was just running essentially with their Rosetta translation layer here. And this seems to be working pretty well, actually. I think they said it was running at 60 frames per second, but I didn't see them putting up any frame rate counters in this demo. But it looks great, right? But I think what's happening here is that this was a game that was written specifically with the Mac OS APIs, which will very easily translate. But if people are doing something outside of Apple's API layer, you may not get that translation. And as a result, I'm not sure really how good Macs are going to be with AAA gaming in the future. It's going to be probably more difficult to port games to the Mac versus now, because a lot of these games that are being ported over to the Mac can use libraries to allow Windows games to run on essentially the OS X Unix platform because they have the same processor base. That's changing now, so gaming might be an issue here. In fact, Steam announced that they're no longer going to support virtual reality on the Mac, and I'm guessing they were doing this ahead of the announcement here of switching to a different platform, because things like VR that are very much processor intensive in addition to GPU intensive are going to be much harder now to run on the Mac, because it's not a matter of just putting a layer in to translate stuff with the Intel hardware. It's now going to have to translate over to the Mac and translate processing platforms here, and I don't think it's going to work as well. Now, of course, Apple could care less about Steam and the Epic Game Store and all these other gaming platforms out there, because Apple makes no money off of the Steam Game Store. If I buy a Steam game, it goes to Valve and to the developer. Apple sees nothing. So now when they do this hardware transition, Steam's not going to run at all, and Apple's going to be able to offer the Mac as another platform for all the games they're making a ton of money on the iOS side, because the Mac is running the same hardware and games will just run on the Mac just as easily as they do on iOS and iPad OS. So this is a real win-win for Apple, and unfortunately, consumer choice on gaming will be limited significantly as a result. Now, another casualty of this transition is likely going to be Windows compatibility, and there's been a number of ways you could run Windows on your Mac. You could use Boot Camp, which would allow the Mac to basically boot up into Windows natively. I've done that quite a bit with my Mac for games every once in a while, so that's going away, of course. And then if you're using Parallels or VMware, that's not going to work like it used to, because, again, you don't have the Intel chip here to virtualize your Windows session. Now, you might be able to do this through their Rosetta translation. I don't think that's likely going to happen. And surprisingly, Apple did devote some time to virtualization in their presentation last week, but they did not show Windows being virtualized. They only showed Linux, and this is likely going to be an ARM version of Linux that's running, in this instance, in Parallels on this ARM-based Mac, and they also showed a Docker session running there as well. But again, no Windows, and I think that was very telling that they didn't demo Windows compatibility, because that was something they did make a big deal about when they transitioned over to Intel 10 years ago. So I think all of those benefits that I once enjoyed with my Mac running Windows are going to be gone. It is possible that they might be able to boot up the ARM version of Windows on the Mac. Microsoft hasn't commented one way or the other on that. That's a possibility, but again, the Apple processor is going to be a bit different than the Qualcomm chips that Microsoft is supporting on Windows right now, so we'll have to just do a wait and see on this one. So Apple showed quite a bit in their presentation, but left a lot of open questions that everyone's trying to figure out. So we're going to move on now to the fun part of this video, which is trying to predict what is going to happen as this transition begins. Now, Apple says there's going to be hardware released by the end of this year, by the end of 2020. So around the holiday shopping season, we might start seeing stuff. And I don't think it's going to take all that long for Apple to get going on this, because this is largely the same hardware they've been manufacturing on the iPad side for some time now. All they got to do is cram it into a Mac case and you're good to go. And if we look back at the Intel transition back in 2005 and 2006, the first two devices they released with Intel were essentially the same hardware from the PowerPC days, just with Intel guts inside. So they had a MacBook Pro, the first MacBook, which was largely based on the PowerBook design, and they had an iMac that was based on the ugly iMac design of the time. And then Apple very quickly released additional hardware, including the Mac Pro and a whole bunch of other Intel-based devices. They moved very quickly once these first two were out in the marketplace, and I think we'll see something similar on this front. The ones that I think we'll see first will be the MacBook Air. I predict that one will be the first one to lose its Intel chips. That's an example of a PC that could be doing a lot better with one of these ARM processors inside, because as you know, the MacBook Air is running with one of those low-powered Intel Core chips. It does okay, but once it starts heating up, it starts throttling. And as we found in our review of the original MacBook Air with one of those chips inside of it, performance wasn't great on it, and I was hoping for a little bit more oomph, and I think the ARM processor will deliver that. I think we're also going to see a Mac Mini, and that actually is the first piece of hardware that Apple did announce. It's only available for developers. It's called their Developer Transition Kit, but that is built inside of a Mac Mini case, so I think that's probably conceivable to see that come out first. Now, the developers are getting designs based on the A12Z processor, which I think is a derivative of the A12 that's in the iPad Pro. These will have significantly more RAM. I think the iPad has maybe 3 or 4 gigs. This one's going to have 16 gigs of RAM, a 512 gig SSD. And remember, from the standpoint of upgradability, Apple made it very hard to upgrade the storage on all the new Macs. I expect this to be a similar issue across the entire line moving forward. They're going to control everything like they do the iPad now. You can see what it's got for I/O. Interestingly, it doesn't have Thunderbolt. I thought that was intriguing that they left that out, especially given that Apple was one of the designers of Thunderbolt. We might see that hopefully in the PCs that come out, so we'll keep an eye on that. And it could be that Apple decides that Thunderbolt isn't important on a consumer device because they know exactly who's using it. And you've got all the basics here like Bluetooth and Gigabit Ethernet, and we'll have to see how it performs once developers get it in their hands. Now, of course, the big question is whether or not you should buy a Mac right now, and I would say definitely don't buy a Mac, at least until the ARM ones come out. There's a great article in PC World that gives you some reasons why you should wait, and they look at some of the prior transitions and what happened with those. And really what it comes down to is that if you're going to spend $2,500 or $3,000 on a MacBook Pro, you're going to want to get as much life out of that machine as possible. I have one that I bought 8 years ago. I spent a lot of money on it, but it's still working today. We're using it to edit video right now. In fact, this video is being edited on that 8-year-old Mac. The thing keeps going. And that was a great value for me because I bought something, for a lot of money 8 years ago, but I've been able to recognize a significant ROI on that because I didn't have to buy another computer 2 years later. In this instance, when Apple finishes that transition, there's likely going to be a point in time where Apple cuts off the compatibility with Intel. And when that happens, your Mac is pretty much obsolete. It'll still work, it'll still boot its operating system up, but you're not going to get the latest operating system. And of course, all of the apps that are running on that Mac likely won't get updated either. So it's going to prematurely cut the lifespan of your Mac if you're running Intel, in my opinion. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen with one exception, which we'll get to in just a second. So wait on the Mac. I don't care how cheap it is. I don't think there's going to be a long-term value proposition with that device. Unless they're selling MacBook Pros for $500 or something, just wait until these ARM ones come out. Now, there was some cryptic stuff, though, in the Apple press announcement, because they did say that this is going to be the start of a 2-year transition away from Intel. But then they said in the article that they published with that headline that they're going to release Intel-based Macs for years to come, which was rather odd to say that we're transitioning in 2 years, but we're going to be making Intel-based Macs for years to come. And I think what we're going to be seeing here is mostly the Intel stuff running on the Pro-level platforms. So the Mac Pro, which is their super expensive high-end computer, is designed for very specific, super intensive applications, usually involving creativity and scientific work. That's stuff that's not going to run all that well in ARM. I can see Apple keeping Intel there because you're going to need the utmost performance, just raw iron horsepower running on that stuff. And I think we'll see that on the Pro side, but all of the consumer stuff is probably going to head over to the ARM platform. So I think the Pro level apps will probably be maintained on both, but I don't know what that means for the MacBook Pro. And I think what's probably going to happen is that the MacBook Pro will be transitioned out, but the Intel stuff will still be supported on the much higher end and much higher profit margin hardware. And that's why I think it's probably safe to say that you are not in a good position if you buy a MacBook Pro right at this moment. So who are the winners and losers in this transition? Well, it's important to first of all look at market share. Gartner did an analysis back in 2019 of global PC shipments, and they found that Apple represents only 7% of the global market share last year, which means that 93% of the computers out there are not Apple's, and most of those are running with Intel processors inside. Now, if Lenovo or HP or Dell decided to drop Intel tomorrow, that would certainly have a greater impact on Intel's bottom line. But in the near term, this is really barely going to leave a mark for Intel because Apple was not one of their larger customers. But there's some things that could happen down the road. Now, the real winner here, of course, is going to be Apple. They are going to now have control over the entire hardware and software stack for every device they make. And every device they make, at least on the consumer side, is going to be on a shared hardware platform. That is huge for the company because it's going to dramatically reduce their engineering and design costs, especially on the Mac, which is probably their least profitable division. So this is a huge win for Apple. I think it'll dramatically increase their profits, and it will also perhaps make the Mac more attractive versus Intel and AMD-based computers that will not perform perhaps as well as the Mac would in certain circumstances, and of course will get less battery life than these ARM-based Macs will get. And I think that's going to start pushing the industry a bit more, which is why I think in the long run, Intel still loses out here because their processors are super powerful, but perhaps more powerful than most consumers need. And as a result, the battery life isn't quite there. I think AMD is also going to get hit by this because they make Intel-compatible processors that can do everything the Intel chips do, including having some of the power issues perhaps that the Intel chips have versus an ARM equivalent. And I think likewise, NVIDIA might feel an impact here too because they make GPUs for PCs. And if we're going to start seeing some super efficient ARM chips with some really powerful GPUs like we see in the iPhone and iPad, that's going to have an impact as to whether or not PCs might need an NVIDIA GPU for certain applications. If you can get it working on a single chip, that might be ideal and it might be better. So perhaps we'll see NVIDIA maybe come up with some additional ARM designs. Remember, they designed the system on a chip that's running on the Nintendo Switch right now, which is an ARM-based device with a GPU inside of it. That's also driving the NVIDIA Shield. So even if Apple just picks up a couple of points of market share with these new ARM-based Macs, it might be enough to push the industry to more aggressively develop ARM-based computers. There are a few out there already running Windows 10. One of the newer ones is the Surface Pro 10 from Microsoft, which is running with a new processor that they jointly developed with Qualcomm that I'm hearing very good things about. Great battery life. I think it's fanless, so it's super quiet. Great performance with the apps that are ARM optimized. And what's cool about what Microsoft is doing with ARM, just like Apple, is that you can run Intel code on the ARM processor. It doesn't run as well as the ARM native versions do, but it's good enough. And I was surprised by how well the Intel code was running on an ARM-based Windows computer I looked at last year from Asus. Now, these didn't sell very well, but I think if they can get the performance up to where Apple is going to be with their Macs, you might see these things start to sell more. And as a result, you might see more manufacturers making ARM-based Windows computers as things roll forward here. So I think we're in the real beginnings of a transition for the entire PC industry, and Apple is very good at knowing when to jump in, and that often then results in the rest of the industry kind of adjusting as well. So this is going to be a big story, I think, as the year develops here, and it might be something that breathes some new life into the PC industry. Now I would love to know what you think about all of this. What I really want is a 12-inch ARM-based MacBook just like this one. I love this computer and its portability, and if I could edit 4K video on it like they were doing on the demo there, that would be totally awesome in such a small form factor. Let me know down in the comments below or on the Facebook group. Now this week's wrap-up is being brought to you by all of you. We had a couple of super chatters during one of my live streams. They are Astifu and Travis Rhodes. I want to thank them for their contributions. We also have a new supporter this week, a new YouTube member, Nick MG. So thank you very much for your support, Nick. I also want to thank everyone who's been contributing on an ongoing basis and all of you who watch on a regular basis too, because all of those things equal channel growth. And if you want to help the channel, you can keep watching, or you can make a contribution via our donor box page at Lon.TV/support. We still support Patreon as well, and of course you can do the YouTube membership program where you can get a cool loyalty badge next to your name when you chat or leave a comment. And again, I want to thank everyone for their support of the channel. Now last week we did 2 live streams. We were playing around with the new Ryzen NV X360 from HP. A nicely performing computer with an Intel equivalent there. We also did another one of my unboxing videos where we looked at the new Legion 5i and took it apart, and we also unboxed a PC on a stick, and both of those items I hope to get to a little later this week with full reviews. On the Extras channel, we unboxed that HP Envy, and then we took the portion of the live stream that I did the Lenovo unboxing and put it up as a separate video on the Extras channel there. It's always good to repurpose content if you can. On the main channel, we did a review of a really low-cost Chromebook. It's like $169 right now at Walmart from Lenovo. We also did the full review of that HP Envy, and we reviewed the Mega EverDrive Pro, which is a flash cartridge for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive that allows you to play Sega CD games on it too. Very cool stuff from Crix, and you can see all of that linked down below in the master playlist. So this week on the channel, we've got a lot of fun things to talk about. One of them is going to be on the SD to SNES flash cartridge. I bought mine 7 years ago. It was one of my earliest videos here on the channel, and they keep adding to it, and now it can support the Super Game Boy. And I figured I would do a follow-up video 7 years later about what this cartridge is all about. So that's going to be a fun one coming up very shortly. Also this week, I'm going to take a look at the Wise Lock, and we'll probably do a live stream as I am installing it in my door upstairs. It's now available on Amazon, so I figured I would get going on that. I've had it for a while. And then related to that, I got in a video doorbell the other day that doesn't require a monthly fee. And I'm always on the lookout for video doorbells that don't require an ongoing cost of ownership. So we're going to take a look at this one from a company called Miko. Haven't heard of them before, but we'll check it out. And then we also will be reviewing the Legion 5i, which is Lenovo's newest mid-range gaming laptop. A pretty nice device. You can see the unboxing that we did again on the Extras channel, and maybe we'll have a few other things on the channel too. Now, if you want to be notified every time I go live, hit that notification bell so you'll get that notification when we go live or upload a video. We have other channels you can follow me on, including my Amazon page at Lon.TV/Amazon shop. You can follow me there because we're streaming on Amazon while we're streaming on YouTube, and sometimes the Amazon experience might be a little bit better from a quality standpoint, so check it out there. We also have some great ways to engage with me and the channel through our Facebook group at Lon.TV/Facebook group. We also have my very infrequent email list that only gets published when we've got something big to announce. And then, of course, we have my store where I sell previously used items, and I've got a bunch of stuff that I'm going to be getting listed on the store later today and tomorrow. So if you go to this address here at Lon.TV/store alert, you'll get an email alert every time I do an update on the store. And these are items that I reviewed here and I'm now getting rid of. Most of them are new, so you get them at a pretty good price, but there's only one of everything because it's just the item that we actually reviewed. So definitely check it out if you're looking to buy something that I have previously covered here. And that is going to do it for this week's weekly wrap-up. I am looking forward to the new ARM-based Macs, and again, hoping to see one in that 12-inch form factor. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. Thank you all for your support. We got a lot of fun stuff coming up in the week ahead here, and I want to thank you all very much for watching. Until next time, this is Lon.TV.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Tom Albrecht, Chris Allegretta, David Hockman, Brian Parker, Mike Patterson, and Bill Pomerantz. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.